Hello, this is Claudia Fados with the Center for Hellenic Studies, and today we're here with Graeme Bird and members of our community to have a discussion exploring Beowulf. So thanks for joining us, Graeme.
Thanks, Claudia.
Graeme, before we get going, I just wanted to share a little bit about you with our community members. Some of us already know you, but some of us who will be joining by video maybe don't yet. So I just want to let everyone know that you're a native of New Zealand and you're Associate Professor of Linguistics and Classics at Gordon College. You're also a participant in the Harvard-affiliated Homer Multitext Project and a lecturer in extension at Harvard's Division of Continuing Education, where you teach courses on mathematics and the Greeks and quantitative reasoning in practical math. Your teaching and research interests include Greek and Latin literature and language, Indo-European linguistics, and early English literature. You are also the author of a very beautiful book, which is available for free through the Center for Hellenic Studies and in print through Harvard University Press. The title is Multitextuality in the Homeric Iliad, The Witness of the Ptolemaic Papyri. Did I say that right?
That's good.
Great. And critical science, drawing attention to special lines of Homer's Iliad in the Venetis A manuscript. That is the chapter in a very beautiful book called Capturing a Homeric Legacy, Images and Insights from the Venetis A manuscript of the Iliad. Graeme, another day we'll have you come here and talk to us about that manuscript. It's absolutely beautiful, and you're part of our project to digitize that. Everyone should know they can download that whole entire book for free also from the Center for Hellenic Studies. And just finally, to very briefly round out what is a very full list of things that you do and enjoy, I just want to let everyone know that you also enjoy making connections between Homeric poetry and jazz improvisation, historical linguistics, even computer programming. So it's pretty much, the list is all the things you can do. Graeme, it would probably be easier to talk about the things you don't do.
That's a very long list, actually.
No. So we're so glad to have you joining us. And I think you're the perfect person to help us really explore this new text. And we're really going to be approaching it all as fellow readers and enthusiasts. And our goal will be to make connections to some of the themes we've been thinking about in our community.
Well, thanks, Janet. Thanks, Claudia.
Yeah,
thanks, all of you, including Janet. It's really nice to be here. And some of you are familiar faces from when we did some Greek a while back. Yes, thank you for that introduction. And I'm a big fan of Homer, as I think most or all of you are, and I'm becoming a fan of Beowulf as well. And I haven't been reading Beowulf nearly as long as I've been reading Homer, but the more I read it, and I think you folks will be discovering just some amazing connections and parallels and similarities, and of course differences between these two wonderful poems. So I just wanted to give a tiny bit of introduction to Beowulf. It's the earliest epic poem written in Old English. It's preserved in one manuscript, which is kind of amazing that we're lucky to have it at all. And when I think of the Iliad in comparison, there's about 180 medieval manuscripts of part or all of the Iliad, including the one Claudia mentioned, Venetis A, which is in Venice. And then there's about scraps of 1,500 papyrus fragments of the Iliad as well. But Beowulf, we got one, and it was damaged in a fire back in the few hundred years ago. So we almost don't have anything at all. So we're very grateful to have it. In terms of how old the manuscript is, it seems like it's around about 1000 CE, 1000 AD. It seems to, the other question is, when was the poem Beowulf composed, whatever that means? And there's so many parallels between the Iliad, when was the Iliad, quote unquote, composed, whatever that means. And we know that Homer, whoever he was a bard who was performing, and there were multiple performances and maybe generations of performers. And in a similar way, it appears that Beowulf goes back to oral traditions, and maybe some scholars I've been reading think that the poem somehow achieved its form in maybe 7 to 800 AD or CE. So, and similarly to Homer, we've got evidence of oral traditions, transmission, formulaic type language being used. Even I was just reading. By the way, here's a book that I've been looking at. This is by Mitchell and Robinson. It's one edition of Beowulf that I like a lot. It has a nice glossary in the back with line numbers, so you can find every occurrence. You can find a hapax. If a word only occurs once in Beowulf, he'll tell you what line it is, which is really nice. But just as Homer, the dialect of Homer is not one dialect, it's a mixture of Ionic and Aeolic and various other things. So Beowulf appears to be a mixture of dialects, and that's kind of fascinating to me. And one possible reason is so that it would have maybe wider accessibility, just as Homer, the idea of Pan-Hellenism that Greg Nage talks about a lot, accessible to all Greeks. So there seems to be maybe something similar going on with Beowulf. Why might folks that love Homer be interested in reading Beowulf? Again, as the Iliad is the earliest Greek epic poem, here we have the earliest Anglo-Saxon epic poem. We have so many similar themes, as I'm sure you know. We have heroes doing mighty deeds. In the Iliad, the heroes are killing other human warriors. In Beowulf, they're killing dragons and monsters and things. But a lot of the language is similar. The idea of a hero overcoming an enemy. As I mentioned, also the idea of formulaic language. So in Homer, I'm sure you are aware of epithets, ornamental epithets. So some people call them. So Achilles is often called godlike Achilles. The same kinds of things are happening in Beowulf, which is just fascinating to me to find these parallels. I'd also like to mention a book at this point. It's called How to Kill a Dragon by Professor Calvert Watkins, who passed away a couple of years ago. But it's an amazingly scholarly book, and he shows that if you look at ancient epics in different Indo-European languages, they share features that show that they must be going back to not just a common language, but a common poetic tradition. So he pulls up examples from Beowulf, from Old Norse, from the Rig Veda, ancient Sanskrit, Old Irish and Welsh, as well as Greek and Latin. It's not bedtime reading, but I recommend it, How to Kill a Dragon. So that's sort of a little intro to Beowulf and why we might be interested in reading it. And as I understand, and feel free to break in at any time, I understand that you are reading Beowulf as a group or individually or however, and some of you are reading it in the translation that by Borden, and some of you might be looking at bits of it in Old English.
It's kind of hard to read in Old English.
Yeah. Okay. I thought we would look at. I'm getting a little echo there.
Oh, are you?
I thought we would look at the first. That's good. The first focus passage. And do you all have the focus passages? Could we maybe put the first one up in Old English? I think, Sarah, you were going to do that, right? Now, you'll see just how hard some of the stuff is to read in Old English, and I'm not going to do this whole presentation in Old English because it's like a foreign language.
Right.
But
you know what's so great? I mean, I think it's so good for us to think about the way that it's okay to approach something we haven't done before. You know, even if we're not perfect, it's still worthwhile to try and attempt.
yes.
So that's one thing I love about this exercise, is just hearing different meters, getting a sense of how this poetry is put together is different from the poetry of Homer or the ancient Greek poetry that we're reading. So again, we're just going to read this as fellow enthusiasts and just get excited about it.
Well spoken. And I think some of you have read more of this in Old English than I have, so I'm not claiming to be an authority, but I love the sound of it, and I love, when I teach my undergrads, I love to just have them try reading a line or two just to get the sound. It sounds so different. So I think you can all see the text. Is that right? Nod if you can see it. Okay, good. Thumbs up. So I'm going to read a few lines, and we'll talk a little bit about it, and then we'll go to the actual English version, the modern English version. So now the punctuation here, this wasn't in the original. So the exclamation point definitely wasn't there. In fact, people debate about whether you should even have an exclamation point. So something like this. So, What we gardena in Yerdagum, their kuninga thrum jefrunon, who the ethelingas ellen fremedon, oft schuld chefing chethena threatum, monigum meithum, modosetla oft her, exoda eorola suthan erest werth, Verschaft funden, hethes frofre bad. Weox under wolknum, weord mundum tha, othed hum egwilch, thar setendra over hronrada huren shoulder, gomben gulden. That was God Kuning. Okay, pretty much got there.
Beautiful, great. So can I ask a few things, or let's see if
Please.
So I'm just curious. I'm just looking visually at the lines. I see that it looks like we have a space. Like the line is broken up into two parts.
Yes.
And also when you were talking and reading the lines, I was hearing a lot of alliteration. Can you talk a little bit about
I'm very happy that you were hearing it. That means, firstly, that I was roughly getting it right, and secondly, that's what's in the poetry. So yes, if you're not familiar with Old English poetry, sometimes it's called the Old English alliterative verse style. So every line is broken into two pieces, as you said, and there is almost invariably alliteration between the two halves. And you can often see it in the writing, and sometimes you should be able to hear it in the saying. So, for instance, the first line we have Gardena and Yergdagum. Notice that the G's are actually pronounced differently. That's another issue that we don't have to get too bogged down in. But the stressed syllable gar and the stressed syllable yer alliterate in some form, and actually, depending on the period of time, they alliterated more or less. The second line, Theod Kuninger, so we have the Theo, that funny letter there at the beginning of the second line is called Thorn, there's a TH. And there's one at the beginning of the second half of line 2, Thrum. So Theod, Thrum, so there's that alliteration. And it must have helped keep the poem linked together, just a wonderfully oral, as in A-U-R-A-L, oral way of experiencing the poetry. One interesting thing, if you notice in line 3, if I say line 3, Hu the ethelingas ellen fremedon, and you don't see any obvious alliteration, apparently when a stressed syllable started with a vowel, it also starts with a glottal stop, which we don't have symbols for, and Old English didn't have a symbol for. When you say a word like bottle, and you say bottle, then that little in there is a glottal. And so the word athelingas is starting with a glottal stop, and ellen is starting with a glottal stop. You can't see it written, but you can hear it, but you have to listen closely. And then as
kind of comes naturally to me as someone who came from near London. We do glottal stops and quite emphasised.
I just heard you do one actually.
Initial vowels with that at the beginning.
Yes. Good. So you're conscious of it. Most English speakers, I think, aren't conscious that we start words with a glottal stop. In languages like Hebrew, you can't start a syllable with a vowel. If it's a vowel, you have to have an aleph, which originally was a sign for a glottal stop, and the same in Arabic as well. And as Claudia said, each line is broken in half. So if you've read some Greek poetry like Homer, you remember that each line of Homer has a caesura, which is a break. Usually a pause. Sometimes it'll have punctuation. Sometimes it won't. But so another interesting point of similarity. But the meter, it's not really metrical in the same way as the Greek dactylic hexameter. I'm not an expert on the meter. People still argue a bit about the meter. I'm finding the more I read about Beowulf, the more debating there is about, how to interpret and understand things, which is great. Debate is what it's all about. So,
Graeme, can I
sorry,
ask one other thing?
my ear things are.
Yeah,
Yes.
sorry.
Yes,
And other people may have questions, so
yes.
please feel free to ask them. I want to ask you about the first word, and I
Yes.
don't know if it's a good time or if we
It's a
should
totally good
look at
time.
the
I was about to do it.
first.
Yes.
Should we look at the translation first, or?
Well, yes. Can we switch to the translation document, or do you all have it in front of you?
Let's switch so that we can present it in the video too. Thanks, Sarah.
So,
here we go.
Okay, so thank you. Yes, the first word in this translation is low, exclamation point, right? And whereas, how many of you know the Seamus Heaney version? He doesn't start with low. He starts with so, I think, with no exclamation point, maybe a comma or a period, I forget which. And Seamus Heaney thinks it's no big deal, we're just starting a story. So, as a lot of modern English speakers start sentences with so. This translation suggests no, it's an exclamation. It's actually outside the meter, probably. So it's an extra metrical word. So other people think no, this is like a very emphatic word, like we're off on some new adventure, some important story. So I want to emphasize it. So I don't know if you have an opinion about that.
Well, sometimes I think I've seen it translated as hark or
yes,
listen.
Right.
And how about can you pronounce that word again for us in Old English?
So in Old English, it starts with HW. So what, something like what. And you can tell that in modern English, often the HW gets switched and it would come out something like what. Although that doesn't seem to make sense here. What? What-ho? I don't think that's quite what they had in mind. So it's just the very first word of Beowulf. People don't all agree on how to punctuate it and what it means. So that's great. But you might think, how does the Iliad start? Anyone remember the first word of the Iliad in Greek? Or in English, depending on which translation.
Meaning.
Meaning, yes, which means?
Means wrath, anger,
yes,
cosmic anger.
I like the way you said wrath. Over here we have to say wrath, but where I come from it was wrath. So jolly good. Yes, and of course, as you remember, the Iliad starts with an invocation. So sing, goddess of the wrath or wrath of Helian Achilles, the destructive wrath, and then it goes on about what the wrath did. I'm getting a note from Anne. In Northeast England, local people often start why, pronounce way. Oh, that's interesting. So, I mean, so much to think about. How was he actually starting the story? So, food for thought, food for all of us to think about.
Yeah, they would say wayman.
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 At the beginning of a sentence
At
or
the
a
beginning
story.
of a story, yeah. Wayman, this is what
Right.
happened yesterday. Wayman.
Yeah. I like that. And because this is going back to oral storytelling traditions, and some oral storytelling traditions, I just think I lost my connection.
I'm sorry?
I can't see anything anymore on the screen.
Oh, I see you.
Okay, good.
Keep on going.
Okay, yeah. There are examples of Old English bits of the language surviving into modern English. So, that's great, Anne. That's nice that we have you for that. Okay, let's just go back to the this first focus passage again. Let's keep it in modern English. And there isn't an invocation here at the beginning, right? Like what we have at the beginning of the Iliad. But we do have, we have heard the glory, and those of you that are reading Homer and loving Homer, as soon as you see the word glory, you might think of a particular Greek word, Like what? Okay, see your lips moving. Kleos, yes, right, Kleos. And it's right at the beginning of the poem is, so the glory, that's an extremely important concept, obviously. And then we have heard. So that doesn't sound so Iliadic. It's not exactly an invocation, but it's clearly an indication of whoever the we are, that these stories are circulating around Anglo-Saxon territory, and that we're hearing them and we're repeating them, and so the oral tradition. This might also remind you, I don't know if any of you have read Sir Gawain and the Green Knight, which is a Middle English anonymous poem. And it actually, if you read the first two stanzas, it talks about we have heard, talks about oral tales, and it even is in the, has the alliterative verse style for most of each stanza. It's just a fascinating carryover of Old English poetic style. But let's keep looking at our first focus passage. So the glory of the kings of the Spear Danes. So I'm really bad at geography, so I like to refer to a little map of who's where. So obviously the Spear Danes come from Denmark, and let me just, I had to get a little genealogy for myself. You can probably find one in one of the books that you may be referring to. So Beowulf is really, he's a member of the Geats, and if you look on a map, the Geats are really in southern Sweden, so you've got Sweden and Denmark are playing a role in the geography. So we've got the Spear Danes in days gone by, how the chieftains wrought mighty deeds. Doesn't it just sound, it's all about heroes winning fame by doing mighty deeds. So the idea of kleos is, it's all the way through this. The word itself, there's actually several words for mighty deeds. Let me just get the one that's being used here. It is thrum. It's the first word in line 2b, thrum. I don't think it sounds like any modern word, but this is a word that you'll see a lot. In the Old English, the second half of the third line, there's another word, ellen, E-L-L-E-N. That's another word for mighty deeds or courageous deeds. So if you know any one called Ellen, that's probably what her name comes from, mighty deeds. Let's go back to our English. Often schuld scheffing, and people debate as to who that was. So you can see already in the first few lines. In a genealogy, he's one of the Danes. He's a famous warrior who's not so much named here. But what did he do? He wrested the mead benches from troops of foes from many tribes. He made fear fall upon the earls. So this mythical character from way back, he's an example of a hero doing mighty deeds. But we haven't even got to Beowulf yet. Yes.
But I mean, that's interesting when we think about the opening of the Iliad too, right? Because there, what we hear about right away is the anger of Achilles and the sort of the effect that it has on other people.
Yes.
Right.
Yes. That's good. In fact, the anger of Achilles, right? It's destructive, and it sends many people down to Hades and causes their bodies to turn into food for birds and dogs.
Mm.
So you're right. So here, this hero is upsetting lots of enemies and making fear fall upon the earls. There's other translations for earls, so this is what this translation says. Let me skim down to the whale road. This is a famous Old English device called a kenning, K-E-N-N-I-N-G. A kenning is if you look in the OED, like a periphrastic way of describing something as a compound. So this is kenning for the ocean, the path that whales travel. Hronrade. So this is very typical of, particularly characteristic of Beowulf type Old English. We'll see a few others of these as we read through these focus passages. But it's I don't know about you. I like hearing this, the whale robe, because you don't think of you got to think about in a concrete term. The passage ends with, "That was a good king," and the book I mentioned to you, How to Kill a Dragon by Calvert Watkins, suggests that even though this is not a superlative, this is kind of like the best, you know, the phrase, the best of the Achaeans, which is actually the name of a book that Professor Naj wrote back in 1979. Suggestion that this is that kind of, this was the best that you get. This is one of the best warriors, even though it's not technically superlative. So there's a lot of other things we could say about this first passage, but and as I say, I like the sound of it. Just you know, having the words run over your tongue. It's good practice if you have the time and the inclination. One other thing before we move on, going back to the mead benches, which is now the third line of our English, is according to scholars is a metonymy. So something standing for the royal hall, the symbol of prestige and power and authority. So the mead benches obviously are the place where you sit and drink and celebrate, but it's standing for a larger entity. And just to put a little plug in for another one of Greg Naj's latest books, just came out, Masterpieces of Metonymy. So okay, let's move. I want to skim through some of the other focus passages, but I want to get to the last one because it just struck me as having so many Homeric connections, really surprising perhaps. If we're just looking, yeah, thanks. The second passage, just a couple of places where it says the fifth line. Then I heard far and wide. There we go. This occurs a lot in Beowulf, as far as I can tell. The I, this has got to be the poet, the narrator, the performer. He's just stressing that we're talking about oral tradition, handing down of tales, repeating tales that have been heard once, and throughout this world, I think of Odyssey Book 8. The beginning of Odyssey Book 8, it talks about the song that had been heard around the world, and just it's the same idea of widespread, not just everlasting, but geographically sort of unconfined fame.
Right, and we have those phrases where you hear about the class, you know, my class will reach to the sky.
Yes, to the sky, right? Yes, exactly, yeah. A couple of lines down, 3 lines down, the greatest of hall dwellings. There's a ton of superlatives in this Beowulfian style. When something is the greatest, the most perfect. This is kind of a poetic device that's in Homer as well, and in other Indo-European poetic traditions. Let's keep going. So I'm just moving fast. If we just scroll down, there's under the heavens, yeah, right there. That was foremost of buildings under the heavens for men of the earth. Again, occurs a lot in Beowulf. That something is the best. It's a poetic way of saying the best there is, the best under the heavens. Just down to the next sections here, about 8 lines. The foamy-necked floater. Isn't that a great phrase? Yes.
So in this case, Graeme, this is talking about the ship.
Yes.
Talked about the well-timbered ship, and then this is an example of what you were talking about, a kenning.
This is going to be another kenning, yes. And I don't have the original Old English here, but isn't it just a beautiful way of describing a ship? I mean, we don't talk about ships like that. Foamy-necked floater, and like a bird. So there's a little simile there, and then right under that, the wave-filled sea. that's got to remind you of how's the sea described in Homer sometimes. You remember some of the adjectives. The wine dark sea is one possibility. People don't even agree on how to translate some of the Homeric adjectives.
Right.
Then, if we just go to the end of this paragraph, they thanked God with a capital G. That brings up the issue that people have debated about this, that Beowulf, you could say one interpretation is it's a pre-Christian collection of pagan orally transmitted stories, but because the audience may have been Christian, there's been some overlaying of a sort of a Christianizing maybe at a later stage. I don't know if people have worked out all the dates of all this, and I think it's still pretty speculative to the detail. But obviously, they thanked God sounds like a Christian element to the story, and some people think it doesn't really fit. It's kind of added in, so you can decide that kind of thing. Okay, let's keep going. The next passage starts with the son of Healfdene. So this is, I think, on the next page. So this is from a bit later, as one of you said. I think the poem's divided into sections called fits, F-I-T-S, and they're numbered here. So this is fit 16. There also that system is used in Sir Gawain as well. So the son of Healfdene gave then to Beowulf a golden ensign as a reward for victory. And so, what's anyone know what the victory is? It's not part of the focus passage. What has Beowulf just done, like a few pages before?
He's killed monster. There's quite a bit of monster killing going on, which is, as
monster
you say,
killing.
Yeah.
You know the name of the monster?
Grendel.
Grendel. And then he's going to kill Grendel's mother in a few pages as well, because I guess Grendel's mother didn't like her boy. Shouldn't really call him a boy, should we? But so that's quite a battle. One of the three big battles that Beowulf takes part in: Grendel, Grendel's mother, and then the dragon. And that's where we'll look. That actually ends up killing Beowulf himself, and that's how the poem ends. But here's his first victory. So again, there's lots of good stuff in this passage, but the second paragraph: I have not heard of many men giving to others on the ale bench in more friendly fashion 4 treasures decked with gold. Now, what's that a way of saying? I have not heard.
So I think that's another superlative and another example of that. I have heard, it's that oral tradition or the authority of the poet to say.
Yes. Yeah, that's good. And as you say, it's on the surface, it doesn't look like a superlative. But if you say, I haven't heard of anyone doing it better, that means my guy's doing it the best. So it's kind of like is this what we might call a litotes? Sort of an understatement for effect, or sort of negative. There are a few cases in Beowulf where someone gets unlittle fame. There's a word unlittle in Old English, meaning not little, meaning big. Yeah, so why don't you say big? Well, not unlittle is kind of poetic, and sometimes by understating you make it even more emphatic.
So, Graeme, can I say a few things about this?
Yep. Yeah.
So, I think that's an ancient Greek thing too, to use a negative to say something, right?
It can be, yes.
Is that kind of an Indo-European poet?
I think it is, yes. This is something Calvert Watkins would talk about in his book. Yes, ways of, you can do the positive superlative, or you can, for variety or extra emphasis, you can make it into a double negative. So not the worst means the best kind of thing. So yeah, sometimes that can be an insult, but I think not in this context.
And here we see the ale bench again, right?
Yes. So mead bench, ale bench is going to be, I'm not sure if there's a difference between mead and ale, but they're all good drinks. Yes.
And then we also now we're going to get a very sort of detailed description about this piece of treasure, which is, I think, something we're also familiar with. Maybe from Homer.
You're talking about the treasures, the helmet with the jutting ridge.
Sure, right.
Yeah. So this might remind you of, I don't know, anyone remember a very detailed description of a military weapon in Homer? Hint, hint.
Scroll 18.
Scroll 18. So the I think someone's mouthing Shield of Achilles, right?
Yeah. Don't be shy, guys. Feel free to take yourself off of mute. Okay?
Yeah. Oh, and I see. Tim said that a bit like New Zealand is saying it's not bad, meaning it's really good. Do we do that, Tim, more outside America? Do Americans say not bad? Maybe not so much.
Yeah.
Maybe
I think. Yeah, I've learned the hard way working in an American company that if someone asks you, are you good with this, and you say, oh, I'm not bad, that can mean they consider you're actually quite bad at it.
Yes, we need to market ourselves better, right, Tim?
That's right.
It's all in the PR factor. I think that's
yes, exactly.
Thank you, that's good. So cultural things. But yes, the Shield of Achilles is, anyone know the fancy literary name for the description of the Shield of Achilles, or of any kind of visible object? Sometimes called an ekphrasis. So ECPHRASIS, or sometimes EK. But this is, I guess, you might say, a mini ekphrasis, but it's a beautiful description of this pretty fancy helmet. And I'm trying to visualize it. I'm not sure if I can, but the helmet is so good that if you bring your sword down on this guy's head, you won't actually hurt him. So the defensive wires, yes, they prevent the old man from being injured. So yes, but the intricacy, the gold-plated, the cunningly wrought, these are fascinating phrases too that I see in Beowulf that interest me. Something, it's like, the Greek word poikilos, meaning varied and cleverly put together. Yes, artfully adorned with gold. So he spends a bit of time talking about those aspects of this gift. So this is a gift for killing Grendel. So yes.
Sorry, I have another question.
Yes.
So, well, I guess it's more of a comment. I mean, I think if we look at the first passage, one of the things he says is that, or maybe the second passage, they're building the hall, and that's a place where they're going to be giving out treasures, right? And so I think,
yes.
As we're thinking about this passage and that passage, sorry, we have sorry, going by outside. We can think about the ways that gift exchange is still very important.
Yes.
In this culture, in this tradition, right?
That's good. And two things come to mind. The famous gift exchange in Iliad Book 6,
right,
where Glaucus and Diomedes trade gifts, except it's not quite an equal exchange, right? And then the gifts given after the funeral games, which are not exactly an exchange of gifts, but gifts given for winners of the various contests. And I think there's other examples too of signs of hospitality.
And so those gifts are also a sign of, in ancient Greek song culture, we might say time, or honor.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
And so it's not about hoarding, it's about giving away. I mean, I mentioned that because it seems like that could be important as we think about towards the end. Right?
Yes, yes.
That seems to be
so you don't take everything for yourself, but you
well, shouldn't be hoarded.
Shouldn't
it
be
should
hoarded.
Be given back out. Yeah, Janet.
Can't hear you, Janet.
Yes.
Okay.
Here we have a gift giving, but this gift giving is for a deed performed.
Yes.
Xenia, when someone comes to your house, you give a gift for the person coming to your house.
Right. So you're right. It's two different occasions, right?
Right.
I think that's really good. So the gift given as a reward for a good deed is kind of like the prizes for the games, as opposed to the Glaucus Diomedes, guest and host giving each other gifts. Yes, Anne.
I think in section 2, it's more a sort of democratization, isn't it? Because it says he's going to part among the young and old, all which God had given him. So it seemed to me then that the role of the king was to actually share what he'd acquired. So,
That's good.
which is different from giving somebody something because they've killed a monster.
Yes, so yes, going back to the second passage. So in this hall, which is the symbol of great honor and authority, he's going to, yes, as you say, divide up evenly all of the goods, except the nation and the lives of men. That's nice. That does sound like democratization.
Yeah.
That's a good point. I like that.
And I think that's how you create relationships with your, I don't know what the word is to call them, so the people under you. I know, help me out, Sarah. What do we call the people who are not the kings? The people who are like your retainers or something?
Yeah, yes, I think retainers. I think that's one of the things I noticed. They talk about kings being ring givers.
Yes, that's it.
And you seem to be building up loyalty amongst your troops, because I know we'll get to it at the end with Beowulf's funeral, but I felt he died because his retainers didn't come and help him. So he died from lack of loyalty, and yet the whole story about him is loyalty. He even comes to a Heorot, you could argue, to help settle a debt of his father's. So
that's good, and actually you're right, Tim. Wiglaf, right, who's the only person that sticks by him at the end, then goes and tells off all the others and sort of chides them for their lack of loyalty and their lack of courage as well, right?
Yeah, I like the how it's described in the edition I've got. I think you pronounce it Seamus Haney. He calls them battle dodgers, and I think that's just such a lovely phrase.
Battle dodgers.
Yeah.
Yes, that is a good phrase. Well, Haney is such a good poet himself that whatever he writes is going to be poetry on its own.
Yes.
Yeah, I like that. That's good.
So, Graeme, I see it's 11:43, and we haven't even gotten to.
Yes. Okay. So let's go to.
Okay? I'm sorry to.
No. I was looking. You're right. So can we go? There's a very short, the second last focus passage. We'll just take 30 seconds on that, and then we'll go to the last one. So the one that starts, "There was song and music," which is on the second to last page, and this just made me think of Odyssey Book 9. Do you remember when Odysseus says, when you're sitting there, you're eating and drinking and having good conversation, good food, people keep your wine glasses full, there's good music, that's sort of the best, that's the best that life has to offer. So that's reminded me of song and music, there's the harp, and there's joy in the hall along the mead bench. Just sounds like a jolly good party.
And so this text is really presenting itself in some way in the context of performance.
I think so, yes. That's what it seems like, yeah. Okay, let's look at the last, so just down a little bit. This is the very end of Beowulf. It's how many lines? It's 20 or 30 lines. And if you read the death of Beowulf, it's very drawn out. He fights the dragon. The dragon puts his teeth around Beowulf's neck. It sounds positively unpleasant. I see Anne just made a comment about the potlatch, which is good. She says, I think Native Americans had feasts called potlatch to distribute wealth amongst themselves. Yes, and the idea behind that, as I understand it, because it's also an Indo-European idea, is to try and outdo each other and who can give the most and the best gifts. So that's another aspect of gift giving. Yeah, thanks for that. Okay, let's go to our last focus passage. So Beowulf takes a long time to die, and he makes, I think, 2 or 3 speeches before he dies about how he doesn't have an heir. So Wiglaf is going to sort of a pseudo heir, and then he finally dies. And so now here's our focus passage about the funeral. Then the people of the Geats made ready for him a pyre, firm on the ground, hung around with helmets, battle targes, bright corselets as he had craved. Then the sorrowing men laid in the midst the famous prince, their loved lord. And it goes on, and I mean, what does this most remind you of? Maybe from Homer.
I think we're all going to think of the funeral pyre of Patroclus and
Yes.
secondarily of Hector, and the sort of slight references to that of Achilles that we get in Odyssey.
Right. No, you're totally right, Anne. And it's interesting, Patroclus gets much, much more attention at his funeral than Hector does at his. Hector, I think, gets there's a lot of lamenting and mourning, but the actual funeral details are sort of a page or so. But Iliad Book 23 is the funeral of Patroclus. And there's line numbers, like I just jotted them down. I was using Fagles, which the line numbers don't exactly match the Greek, but the idea of building the pyre and where are we? The cry of weeping. So if you look at on here, do you see the cry of weeping just at the top of the last page?
Mm-hmm.
We've got the smoking glow, the crackling flame, the cry of weeping. We've even got the dirge 5 lines down on the top of the last page. So lamenting and dirging, and this is a huge part of Greek, the culture of Greek funerals. Usually, right, a woman or a group of women singing a funeral song, and the lament. Do you remember who sings the lament for Patroclus? A woman that sings a lament for Patroclus, which is very unusual.
Was it Briseis?
Yes, Briseis. And it's interesting because she's a woman, and secondly, she's like a prisoner, a concubine, however you want to think of her. And yet she gets quite a few lines, and some good books have been written about this, the Lament of Briseis, and how she praises Patroclus. And as Tim said, the death of Patroclus foreshadows the death of Achilles in many ways. So there's just so many close. Let's look at some other close passages.
I mean, that mound that is. Can we read that?
Yes, we're going to get to the mound. Just before I get to the mound, in Homer, in the Iliad, remember the fire doesn't burn for a while. It's not burning. So Iris has to go up and get winds to come down and blow it to make sure the fire keeps going. Here, though, it's a little bit different. Where are we here? If you go up a couple of lines, we've got the crackling flame, the cry of weeping, the tumult of the winds ceased. So here it looks like the winds stop so that the fire can burn, whereas in the Iliad, the winds help the fire to burn, which is interesting. The main thing is that the fire has to get burned until it had consumed the body, hot to the heart. And in the Iliad, they gather the bones of Patroclus, right, to put in an urn. And in fact, Achilles' bones are going to go into the same urn as those of Patroclus. Yes, let's go down to the mound. And by the way, sorry, one other thing. In Book 18 of the Iliad, when Achilles finds out that Patroclus has died, who comes and sings a dirge for him in Book 18? Do you remember? It's his mother, Thetis, and she sings a dirge, right, as if it's almost like she's singing a dirge for the dead Achilles, but she's singing a dirge for the dead Patroclus, but she's kind of resting Achilles' head on her lap, almost as if he's dead, even though he isn't. Let me just look at a comment from Tim. Tim says, I thought it was interesting that the woman singing has composed hair, unlike the laments in Homer, where the hair is disheveled, right? Mm. That's an interesting point.
But it's interesting, even the emphasis on the hair, right?
Yes,
as
the one
singing it.
With bound.
That's a relatively significant detail when you're describing a woman lamenting, is to mention her hair, right?
That's good. So it seems like a cultural difference, maybe. That in Greek, how does Achilles show his grief? He kind of grabs dirt and puts it on his head, kind of like in Hebrew Bible, the sackcloth and ashes kind of thing, which I'm not sure that it seems to be different the way it's going here. Let's go to this mound. So the people of the Wedders, and then you might be thinking, who are the Wedders? So again, that's why this book that I'm using, Mitchell and Robinson, I'm sure others have it too. You can look in the back under the glossary of proper names. So it seems to be a synonym for the geese. It may relate to the word for weather. But they wrought a mound which was lofty and broad, etc., etc. And I think the word barrow comes, where's the word barrow? A few lines down. They laid on the barrow rings. There's the rings that Tim was talking about, and ornaments. And for those people that are following along with the videos, we're up to about hour 7 or 8, and as I was just reading
in Heroes X right now, the 5th version of Heroes X, many of our participants are at hour 7.
Hour 7, and one of the key words for hour 7 is the word sema, which can mean several different things, like barrow, a funeral mound, but also sign or symbol, and from which we get the word semiotics and semantics and things like that. So it must be incredibly important that the funeral pyre and barrow and mound of this dead warrior is a huge amount of honor is put into it, and the fact that it's still there and it's visible for everyone to see as a kind of a sign. And in
from
fact,
the sea.
From the sea,
just like the other.
Yes.
Just like the mound of Patroclus. So,
Yeah.
so Graeme, what are we supposed to? I guess, or how are we supposed to think about this when we see these kind of similarities? What should we think, or how do we approach this?
We should get excited first, and we should say, "Wow, this stuff is not." We shouldn't think coincidence. We should think we're looking at two ancient traditions that we know are both Indo-European, and we should be noting these similarities, getting excited about them, and trying to look for some deeper connection. Why would a barrow or a funeral mound be so important? And because I think we know more, we're more familiar with Homer because of all the research that people like Greg Nage and others have done. People have thought a lot about the Sema, and I think people haven't been working on this stuff for as long with Beowulf, and I think there's still work to be done, like making comparisons like this and saying, we know what Sema means in Homer. What's going on here, and is it similar? Is it parallel? Is the funeral of a mighty hero? It's a sign. It's a symbol in some way, just as it was in Homer. And then to kind of carefully read closely this passage as we're sort of making a start on. And then, as Calvert Watkins says in his book, we're actually looking at poetic traditions that must go back to a common origin that's thousands and thousands of years old. And so this is telling us something about, you know, our 5,000-6,000-year-old ancestors of Western literature and poetry. Is that kind of what you're asking?
Yes, it's incredible.
I think it's just amazing.
Dazzling.
And that's why it's so good to be reading more than one thing at the same time, because things are jumping out at you that you probably wouldn't have thought.
One of the things that jumped out here is not only the Patroclus, but there's a little passage where Hector talks about, you know, whoever wins, you know, if you can build up a barrow, or he says a funeral mound, and seafarers will see it from the sea. I can't remember which book of Iliad it is, but Hector actually says this early on, and it's almost, you know, the same kind of visualization as if from the sea rather than from the land.
No, you're right. And so what's different? Yeah, because people come from the sea, because this is the geography of this place. It's islands and promontories and seas. So yes, so people coming from wherever are going to be able to see this. So just emphasizing the prominence. You're right. When you see these close linguistic parallels, but not necessarily word for word, but idea for idea, it should make you want to sort of dig in a little bit more. And every now and then there's an actual parallel in words that are cognates that come from the same root. This can happen. It happens especially in Sanskrit versus Greek, and a little bit in the English as well. So yeah, these parallels are very exciting. Let me see a couple more things. The end of the second to last paragraph. Yes, so they exalted his heroic life and praised his valorous deed. I think it's supposed to be deeds, right? But I'm not sure. Praised his valorous deeds with all their strength. This is really interesting. Who are these people? A couple of lines up. These are the men bold in battle, sons of chieftains, 12 in all, rode about the mound. They were minded to utter their grief, to lament the king, to make a chant, and to speak of the man. They exalted his heroic life and praised his valorous deed. I like this phrase, with all their strength. Does that make anyone think of something?
No, I don't know. What does anyone have a sense of?
I just thought of something this morning. I'm sure I'm not the first.
No, tell us.
Well, I mean, what happens after Funeral of Patroclus in Book 23?
Oh.
It's the funeral games. And the funeral games are people competing with all their strength against each other for a prize. But why are they doing it? They're really doing it in honor of the dead hero. So we don't have funeral games here per se, but I think this is sort of an equivalent.
So cool.
So these guys are, and just when I thought with all their strength, because that's what a competition is, right? It's where you put everything into it.
Right.
So.
And I think even, you know, singing, performing, whether it's lament or an epic, is itself really a physical act, right? I mean, you know, you're a performer.
Yes.
So, yeah. So,
it's very physical and it's very exhausting. And it's also, you do the very, very best you can, and you practice really practice hard.
Yeah, so one thing we didn't get to say in the introduction is that you were also a very accomplished musician.
Well, thanks. I love to play jazz piano.
Yeah.
And I practice every night. After I teach my night class, I practice really hard. It's a mixture of soothing and exhausting at the same time.
Yeah.
But I like to say, yes, that's good. Performers, you only get to become a bard if you're the best there is, right? And you get the best reward by singing the best songs to honor the best hero. And actually, it's fitting that we end with superlatives. So the very last paragraph here is the very end of Beowulf. So let me read this. Thus it is fitting that a man should extol his friendly lord in words, should heartily love him when he must needs depart from his body and pass away. Thus did the men of the Geats, his hearth companions, bewail the fall of their lord. They said that among the kings of the world he was, we got 4 superlatives. The mildest, again, mild has different connotations, but maybe it is mildest. Most kindly, most gentle, and then most eager for praise is just a fascinating word. It's I don't have it here in the Old English, but it's a long multi-syllable word. It's oh, thank you. Lodyornost. Sorry, Lofyornost. I'm going to say that right. But if I read the last 2 lines, manum mildost on mond verust, leadum lidost on Lofyornost. I mean, you can hear some serious alliteration there. And isn't it fitting that Beowulf is most eager for fame, most eager for praise? Because that's such an important value, just as it is at Homer, is achieving immortality through having people sing and talk about you into the ages, an imperishable fame.
Oh, Graeme, how beautiful. So it's 12 o'clock. So
yes.
We've already reached the closing of our event. But so maybe does anyone have any little comments they want to say about those closing lines? Sarah, I saw you were writing something in the chat bar.
Oh, Sarah gave us the Old English word to Lofyornost. Thank you. Yeah. Any other
I'm gonna go back to you. Well, no. Okay. So honestly, I think everyone has been dazzled by the beautiful closing of Beowulf.
Well, it's just nice that it ended that way, right?
Right. I mean,
So,
all those incredible superlatives were so interesting. I never have really thought about those closing lines. I had always focused in the past on the lines of the death of Beowulf. So now I want to go back and look at that and think about Best of the Achaeans and.
Well, the death of Beowulf, it talks about his soul departing, so
Yeah.
that's got Homeric parallels. But and how does the Iliad end? What's the last line of Hector? Oops, I just gave it away. I think.
Hector, tamer of horses.
Yes, and so they buried Hector, tamer of horses. I hate it when I give the answer away accidentally by putting it into the question.
I knew it anyway.
But anyway, right. I believe you.
All right, guys, so this was really just the beginning of our community conversation about Beowulf. But Graeme, you've done such a great job to get us excited about reading it.
Yeah.
I think if people were holding back or maybe hesitant, I hope they're feeling like they're absolutely ready to start reading this text, to see connections. This is not something that is 100% disconnected from what we have been doing. They're going to see a lot of things that may look familiar, and then things that are different. And so it's going to make it a super exciting read, I think.
Thanks for your comments in the sidebar. I appreciate that too.
Yeah. So thanks to everyone who is watching the live broadcast today. If you're watching this video off of YouTube or on Hour 25, we appreciate your participation even after the fact. There will be ways that you can continue the conversation in the Hour 25 discussion forums. And we look forward to talking to you again. Graeme?
Yes, thank you very much. I enjoyed this. Thank you.
Oh,
folks that I can see. It's nice to see familiar faces, and I appreciate your comments very much. I'm enjoying reading this, and I'm continuing to read it, and I hope you will too. So very nice being with you.
Graeme, you're always such a good sport to join us. And last word, Sarah is reminding me that we will add a link to all the items of interest that were mentioned during the discussion. We'll add those to the post on Hour 25. So thank you, everyone, for your time today, and we look forward to our next conversation. Take great care.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Thanks.